thought you might be interested in an experience I had with Bob Hope, who was a worldwide celebrity entertainer. A lot of the young people today don't even know who he was, but everybody knew who he was back in the 60s. A wonderful man, used to entertain the troops all over the world. At Christmas time, he would take his time and go visit the troops in different islands and different war zones and bring him a lot of happiness because he was the funniest guy in the world. Anyway, there was a time in my life that I didn't work for myself. It was only a 2-year period of time because I had a difficult time adjusting to having somebody else tell me what to do and when to do it and if to do it and to quit doing it. And back in 1961, we had sold Xanadu Lodge, which was a hotel and a restaurant, and I didn't have a business because I'd sold that business, and so I had to have an income, and so I went to work for the university as the assistant coordinator of student activities. Well, it became my job, or I created the job, I guess, of having notable entertainers come to Utah State University and put on programs. And I had a lot of them. I had Gene Autry and Dale Evans and Henry Kaiser and Ronald Reagan.
Wow.
That's before he was president. It's when he was vice president of California or something.
Governor, maybe.
Governor of California. We had a lot of notables, but one of the great ones was Bob Hope. And it was my opportunity, or my job, to negotiate a contract with him to get him to come and then charge enough admission so we could pay him his fee, which was $7,000 on this particular occasion. But I made contact with his manager, and whose name was Mark something. Anyway, we arranged for Bob Hope to come to Utah State University, which was a big event, and we filled the basketball arena in the round, and he would be in the center, and he would just walk around and around and talk to the audience all the way around. Anyway, I had to get him here some way, and there weren't any airports here big enough for him to fly into Logan. So I went and picked him up at the Salt Lake Airport in my little, probably was about a 1956 Chevrolet Coupe or whatever I had. He gets off this airliner, and I walk him over to, and he made some crack about haven't ridden in this nice a car for a long time. Anyway, on the way back from the airport to Logan, we got to talking. He says, now I want you to tell me about some of the notables in your area so that I can use them in my presentation when I do my program. And so one of them at that time that came to mind was Merlin Olsen. Merlin Olsen was the greatest football player probably to come out of Logan. And he was just a senior at that time at Utah State. And so I got to talking to him about that, and he said, well, I'm interested in him. Is there any possibility that you could maybe get me some stuff on him, because I'd like to talk about him in my program? And of course I knew his mother, so I went and knocked on her door. I said, Mrs. Olson, Bob Hope's going to be in town, and he's interested in knowing more about Merlin. And she says, oh, Bob, I said, I have a scrapbook. She had a scrapbook. It was that full of things he'd done ever since he was in junior high school. He just was a great athlete, a great guy.
Yeah.
And so I said, would there be any chance I could borrow this and take it up to his motel tonight so he could kind of go through it, become more familiar? She says, oh yes, but you be sure to bring it back. So I took it up to the Mitchell Motel where Bob was staying, and the next morning when I picked him up, he said, Jack, he says, I want to talk to that Merlin Olson. Can you get me a chance to talk to him? And I said, well, yeah, I know where he lives. He lives at the Sigma Chi house. I'm sure he would do that. And he says, well, I just may lay some gold in his lap. I had no idea what that meant. But anyway, I got a hold of Merlin, got them together at about 3 o'clock, and they visited for about 45 minutes or an hour. And then that night, when he did his presentation, he used Merlin in his speeches or in his talk and his jokes and so on and so forth. Of course, Merlin was the all-American hero of Logan, Utah.
Oh, yeah.
Bob Hope talking about him, you know. Funny part that comes to my mind first, though. I introduced first the president of the university, whose name was Darrell Chase, and he then was going to introduce Bob to the congregation. Well, Bob and I were standing down off the stage there, and President Chase was going on and on. And Bob says, how do you get that guy off there? He says, this is my show. He says, anyway, finally, President Chase quit talking. Bob gave his round robin deal that he did, and went over great. While he was here, Charlotte was pregnant with Daniel. And so she was about 7 months pregnant. So we went to dinner, went down to the Bluebird restaurant. I called Guy Carden ahead of time, who owned the Bluebird, and I said, is there a possibility we could get a table kind of back out of the way, because I'm going to bring Bob Hope down, and people will all want to come up and shake his hand and get his. And he says, yeah. He says, I'll fix a nice table for you over in the corner of this room. As we're walking up to the restaurant, here's Guy Carden in a tuxedo out in front of his restaurant to greet Bob Hope, which I hadn't anticipated. But I said, Mr. Carden, this is Bob Hope. And Bob looked up, and on the sign above the restaurant, it said, established in 1928 or something like that. And Bob Hope said hello to Mr. Carden. He says, I hope to hell you've changed chefs since then. Just spontaneous.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, while we were eating, people would pass cards. I was in Iwo Jima in 1946 when you came over to visit the troops, and I was in Italy when you came, and someone else. They were all passing little cards to him. Kind of really neat, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they respected him. All they would do is just hand me a card and say, could I just shake his hand? And of course, Bob Hope would shake hands with anybody. So anyway, that was the experience of bringing Bob Hope in. Now, after he went back I had a seminar over in Denver for the university sent me over there to learn something about what I was supposed to be doing or whatever. Well, Bob Hope had my home phone number, so he called Charlotte. And he says, "Where's Jack? I'd like to talk." Well, first he just said, "How are you?" and "How you feeling?" And he just is calm and just is interested in her pregnancy and everything. Then he says, "Is Jack around?" She said, "No, he's over in Denver. He's over there to a conference." He said, "You know where he's staying?" She says, "No, I don't know." And he said, "Well, if I named some of the hotels there, would you recognize the name?" And she said, "I might." So he starts naming off hotels in Denver, Colorado, and he came to the Broadmoor. She says, "I think that's where he's staying." Now, I found out later that Bob Hope owned KOA radio station in Denver, so he was familiar there. Anyway, about this time, I'm just turned off. Who is it?
Doesn't say.
Logan, 764-8149.
Okay. About this time, I'm checking in at the Broadmoor Hotel. He has apparently called there asking for me. When I got up to the desk, the reception says, "Oh yes, Mr. Nixon, we've been waiting for you to check in." I thought, I'm nothing but I'm nothing. I'm just this kid from Utah State. Why are you waiting for me? But they were really nice to me. But anyway, I checked in. I got on the elevator, and the elevator operator, in those days they had an elevator operator, you know, that punched the rooms you go to. He said, "Do you really know Bob Hope?" In Denver, Colorado, who would know the elevator operator?
Right.
Anything. I couldn't even, and I said, "Well, yeah, I know him." And that's all it was said, but I was flabbergasted. I got into my room and the light was on, the message light. So I got, and I said, "I understand that I have a call waiting." And she said, "Oh, Mr. Nixon, we're so glad you're here. Mr. Hope's been trying to reach you all morning." And I thought, "Oh man, what did I do wrong? I mean, why would he be calling me over?" Anyway, and so I called back, and the lady that took it says, "Well, he's just practicing now for the Emmy Awards," or whatever. He used to do the show for the awards of all of the, you know, the Hollywood set. He's practicing for that right now, and he'll be tied up till 9 o'clock. But he wants to talk to you, Mr. Nixon. So could you call us back at a little after 9? Now, I'm waiting all afternoon. What in the heck have I done? What do you want me? Well, you know. And I'm thinking all kinds of things. And so anyway, I called him back, and they grabbed him and put him on, and he came on. And he said, "Jack, how are you?" And he said, "How do they like the show?" And I said, "Wonderful." And he said, "How's Charlotte? I just talked to her a little while ago, and we just talked." And I thought, "What do you call me? What's going on?" And then he said, "Jack," he said, "how do you like your job?" And I said, "Well, I like it, but I didn't like any kind of job that I was having to be told what to do or when to go there or so on." But I said, "I like it." And he said, "Have you ever thought about making a change?" And I says, well, no, not really. And he says, well, he says, if you ever do, he says, give me a ring. He says, and we'll set you up. I didn't know what that meant. I'm a kid, just flabbergasted. And then he says, now this is my number, and it was a Tabor 1000 number. I still remember the number. And he says, Dolores.
Tabor and Hunter and Ingersoll.
He says, Dolores, if I'm not there, Dolores will take your call, but she'll get in touch with me. He says, do you ever come down with your family? He said. And I said, well, we go down there once in a while. And he said, well, I'll get you tickets for anything you want, anytime you want to come down. And I'd given him a Book of Mormon. And not that time, but later, he said, one other time, a little later when I talked to him, he said, now, Jack, I know where that book is, but I haven't read it, so don't ask me again if I've read it. Anyway, we talked a time or two, and I talked to Dolores a couple of times and got acquainted with her over the phone and so on and so forth. What he really wanted to know, I know what it was. He said, when we paid him the $7,000 that we had agreed to pay, and we still made some money on it. But the president of the university, President Chase, had said, Jack, see if you can get him down a little bit. And so in the process of when I paid him, I said, the university's wondering if you'd want to give us a little discount. And he said, let me tell you something, Jack. He says, we had a deal. Now, if you wanted me to do this show free, you should have asked me before. Or if you wanted a discount, you should have asked me before. He said, I don't like renegotiating deals. I'll never forget. Mm-hmm. I mean, so that had been burning him a little bit, that we'd even asked if he'd been paid, but I, out of courtesy of my boss, had asked him if he was willing to discount. I just thought of that. I hadn't thought of that deal since I started, a long time. Anyway, that was my introduction to Bob Hope. I came home and Charlotte says, what did Bob want? What do you want? I says, well, he just wanted to talk about the show. And I said, he said something funny to me. He said something about if I ever wanted to change jobs, just let him know and he'd set us up. She says, well, what does he want to do? What is he going to do? And I says, I have no interest in going to California. And she says, you need to find out. And I says, honey, we don't want to take our family to California. I really had no interest in it. He had told me he had 160 acres of property right there in Bel Air. And he said, and I said, well, what are you doing with that property? And he says, I'm raising grain. And I said, well, are you going to develop it or what are you going to do? And he says, no, he says, I just like to look at the amber waves of grain, he says. I just remember a few of these statements that he made. Anyway, that was my experience. He gave me this picture, signed it, which I've had hanging in my office for a long time. But
That's awesome.
I had a great experience with him. Learned to love him, respect him, and I learned a lesson or two about renegotiating after you cut a deal.
Yeah, that's a good lesson.
Good wisdom.
Yeah. Anyway, that's my
Cool.
story with Bob Hope. We never did find out what he had in mind.